The metaphor that comes to mind is the distinction between digital detox and submitting yourself to the law in relationship to Shabbos. Now, these are two different experiences of Shabbos. Obviously, there could be overlap, but one is a focus on self-expression, personal development, getting in touch with your authentic self, and the other one is submitting yourself to a higher principle. Now, this is something that in the modern day we are slightly less comfortable with. I don't think anybody was always comfortable with it, but the idea of a system above you demanding something of you, people often shy away from. But we're going to dive headfirst into it. Welcome. I'm Simi Lerner, and this is the Judaism from Within podcast, the podcast where we go through the works and the perspective of Rav Hirsch. So let's dive straight into things. We're talking about Rav Hirsch's approach that he lays out before us in the fourth essay on the month of Sivan. We're coming up to Shavot, the time of the law, the time of the Torah. And at the most fundamental level, Judaism is a revealed religion. Now, we're going to go into this in more detail in some of the other essays, but on the most basic level, Judaism is a revealed tradition. It wasn't an emergent principle from the people, it was given to the people. And Rav Hirsch, in his day, is really chastising the preachers, the clergymen of his day, that mold and form Judaism like you would a wax model. And they make it palatable, and they make it attractive, and they ifs and buts and add 16 footnotes to that you're not supposed to light a fire on Shabbos, and he's calling them out. He's calling out the hypocrisy of applying certain principles in some way and leaving them out in another way. Now, I want to caveat this because I really want to dive into this without any caveats. But I'm going to begin with a framing, and then we're going to sort of try and suspend our disbelief and just jump straight into it because his metaphor and his perspective is very powerful. I want to caveat this to my listeners who, depending on your religious orientation and your religious practice, two things to point out. First of all, Rav Hirsch isn't talking about the truth of the idea that Judaism is a revealed tradition. That's an assumption of his perspective. Now, he justifies it in other places, but that's not the conversation now. The conversation, we are going in with the understanding that Judaism is a revealed tradition. Moshe revealed the law at Har Sinai, in which case it comes from beyond. That is a principle that we're going into this conversation with. It's an assumption. Now, obviously we can question that assumption, but for the purposes of this discussion, it's the assumption that we're going in with. You agree this comes from the Almighty. You agree this comes from beyond you. It is at the source and at the root of existence. Principle one. Principle two that we have to take into mind, this isn't a personal attack on anybody's ability to practice something. Every individual can accept that a concept is a demand on them. They ought to do something, but they might not be in a position where they want to do it, or they might not be in a position where they are able to do it. That is also kind of beside the point. What Rav Hirsch is doing here is he's framing Judaism in its most authentic way. What he feels is how Judaism should be approached, even if not everyone can live up to that standard. We harm ourselves, or we do a disservice to ourselves if we take Judaism and we make it a mirror of ourselves. Judaism as a system, as a concept, as a relationship, should always be above us. It should be something we are striving towards. Now, with that in mind, what does Rav Hirsch do? He opens up with history, the history of the Jewish people, but not the history of the Jewish people that you're often used to. Har Sinai, Yetziat Mitzrayim. No, we're going to Chizkiyahu HaMelech, the king of Yehuda, and his son, the evil son Menashe. Such an evil child. It's always the joke that why do such great people have rubbish sons? But Menashe was an evil child. He was a child that was obsessed with paganism, synchronicity of the different pagan religions, interweaving them with Judaism. But more than that, he did something so awful. He re-established or rebuilt the Bomot. The Bomot were these rocks that individuals would bring korbanos on, personal korbanos, but that was forbidden once we had the erection of the temple. The temple was erected, the law was given, and then Jewish people were only meant to give korbanos in the Mizbeach, on the Mizbeach, not on personal Bomot in your own backyard. What did Menashe do in his desire to tear down Judaism and build it in his own image? He resurrected them. So much so his son Ammon, oh, he was even worse. He was like Menashe on steroids. He destroyed all the scrolls he could get his hands on, which is why we move to his son, Yeshayahu. He found that scroll. A beautiful story of a young king growing of age and saying, I want to be a king. I want to be a king not like my father, not like my grandfather. I want to be a king like David. I want to be a king like David HaMelech. And that was his inspiration to start on his journey of a revolution. But just an interesting fun fact, during the time of Menashe and Ammon, we don't really have any other prophets. There were no prophets during that time, except Nahum, who basically speaks about the fall of Assyria. But it's interesting that all the other prophets sort of sandwiched these two because they basically killed them all. But anyway, so what did Menashe do? He resurrected the Bomot. Now this is key for Rav Hirsch, because what does he look at people who try and mold Judaism in their own image? He looks at them as spiritual heirs of Menashe. Judaism isn't a system that is there to reflect your inner truth. It's not there for you to express a social posture. It's not there for you to virtue signal. It's there for you to submit yourself under. It is a highest principle. It is the highest ideal that you are supposed to submit yourself to. Imagine the absurdity of someone saying, I have a perspective on the world that claims to be the ultimate good, and you go and say, my gosh, I agree. That is the ultimate good. But can we change just this? Rav Hirsch says, this isn't a bomot. This isn't your personal way of connecting to God in your own personal, subjective, narcissistic way. No, this isn't about you feeling spiritual. This is about you being part of something bigger than yourself. You are tethered to a higher reality. You are tethered to a system, a perspective that has a journey that you are invited on. And as he calls to the rabbis of his time, what are you doing? You're molding Judaism as a wax figure. This is where Rav Hirsch invokes the idea that where God's name, or where God causes his name to be, he will bless you. Rav Hirsch looks at this in the associated Gemaras, that this is basically the opposite of what we would probably often hear as where is God, where you let him in. Yes, there is a truth to that, but there's also something very twisted about it. It's not wherever you let him in, it's wherever his name is present. Once again, it's a decision. There's something unique about this system, or there's not. The minute you open the door for it to be an expression of the human ideal, then it becomes moldable and waxable, as Rav Hirsch puts it, crafty reservations that you put into it. And this is where he calls on the hypocrisy. You have this system that is what's carried the Jews throughout history. And when it comes to Shabbos, because of economic and social reasons, you caveat Shabbos. Would you do the same with the other commandments in the 10? Would you do it for theft? Caveat? No. Would you do it for murder? No. So why are you doing it with Shabbos? This is the idea that when there is a principle, articulate it as a concept that is ideal. If people can't live up to that, that's another conversation, but you don't water down the concept. This is an idea in a very disconnected way, something that myself and Rivka do when we teach in Tel Aviv. People are often shocked when we go through our sources in Tel Aviv. They're like, but these are beginners. And we're like, yes, they're beginners, but that doesn't mean we can't learn with them in an authentic, direct way. We don't have to water down what we're learning, not necessarily in a halachic way, but a hashkafic way as well. People who are intelligent are attracted. People who are interested, curious, are attracted. And if you gave them a watered-down version of Judaism, you're doing them a disservice. You're watering it down to make it more palatable, but then who are you serving? So, you have this concept called the Torah. You have this law that stands above you. It demands something of you. Rav Hirsch develops the history a little bit further. When Yeshayahu found the scroll in a crack in the Beis Hamikdash and took it to Huldah, he basically did a split between the state and the nation. The state was falling. Rav Hirsch looks at this as almost a calculated move where the Torah became the source code for us as a people, that which we took throughout the diaspora, and that's what's kept us together. So both on a theological level, but also on a practical level, this is what's held us through the exile. And now, Rav Hirsch looks at his modern contemporaries, you want to uproot that? You want to change that because you don't want it to demand something of you? You want to make your bomot, you want to make your personal area of sacrifice. But that's not authentic. That's not authentic to what you claim to be doing. You become a spiritual heir of Menashe. So, thank you for listening. We will now do a quick recap. We first opened up with the idea of Sivan, the festival of the giving of the Torah. We then spoke about the idea of having a principle in your life, having a ideal that you are committed to. But in the living out of that ideal, you're imperfect. You're not even necessarily 100% sure of this ideal in its truth claims. You doubt it, but you're acting towards it as an ideal. Rav Hirsch takes us on a journey where, how would you look at it if you actually saw it as an ideal in the absolute sense, even if that's not your situation right now? And for those of us who are teaching, those of us who are informing, those of us who are guiding, we have to articulate it in its most authentic way, not caveat it and mold it to make it palatable to the people we're speaking to, because then we become spiritual heirs of Menashe. We become spiritual heirs to this idea that Judaism is for me, rather than for something higher, rather than for a moral ideal that I'm trying to fit myself within. It becomes something that it has to mold itself to me. So, the distinction between a bomot and a mizbeach in one location, structured and built in the Beis HaMikdash, the location, the one source for the ideals. And that's where you bring your korbanos. Menashe was like, no, you do you. You do your thing, and that's okay. And that undermined Judaism to the point where people had basically forgot it. And that when Yeshayahu took the scroll, he had to go to the Neviah of the time and say, what is this? He then made a shift between the state and the nation. The nation would hold the Torah at its source, because the state was going to be destroyed. But the source was the Torah. And that source code was what carried us through the exile. But then when you start to mess with it, and you start to tamper with it, and you start to edit it, well, then not only are you disconnecting yourself from your authentic mission, you're also undermining the continuity of our nation. As always, until next time, have a wonderful week.